I actually still see ETH potentially, the small probability upside is that it hits 40,000 by the summer. That's because of the staking cycle and how the charts look, and using the log chart, extending it forwards, and a number of things give me that. I own Bitcoin, or I'm a pension fund that owns Bitcoin, and I know I'm not going to take it off my balance sheet, and therefore I want to get a yield for holding it. You know, we've got that certainly in Ethereum, but not that far out yet. Mm-hmm. But you need to be compensated for holding an asset for an extended period of time. So it's coming, and the Bitcoin bond was part of that, but it's not really that. ETH staking is definitely closer to that. But we want to see different points of a curve, because if anybody understands that short-term interest rates are different to long-term interest rates, because there's different risks, one being inflation risks over the long run versus the short run, growth risks, stuff like that. October 2020, that I had been following the Ethereum chart, and I looked at it and thought, this looks like it's going to break out. I then looked at the Bitcoin Ethereum chart, and I realized that it was forming a pattern that looked like it was going to break out. So I'm using my probabilistic odds and charts, which is what we talked about at the beginning, and thought, this looks interesting. So I posted it on Twitter, and what happens was an immense backlash.
I know that.
How dare you?
Yeah.
I'm like, that's interesting. So when somebody does something like that, to say, I refuse you to think along those lines, I will always go down that. You know, I'm a contrarian by nature.
Me too.
So then I started looking at Bitcoin. Then I looked at the chart of Ethereum when it had the same number of wallet addresses as Bitcoin. And I realized it's exactly the same price. I'm like, and the charts look identical. I'm like, And then I started looking at other assets, and they started looking like they were Bitcoin, but from the 2017 cycle, and Bitcoin looked like, and Ethereum looked like Bitcoin from the 2017 cycle. I'm like, why do these all look the same? And then I realized that it was to do with Metcalfe's law and network adoption models, and that they were all following the same path. And therefore, there was no difference between Bitcoin and Ethereum from an investor's point of view. You may have a philosophical opinion, but at this phase, when we're talking about the adoption of these assets, they're all the same. And it all depends on what's getting the adoption for whatever purposes, whatever reason. I have been using the 2013 Bitcoin chart for a year and a half now. It's worked very well. I also know that those things fail just when you expect them the most to work.
Yeah.
But it gives me conviction. So I'm looking at the chart pattern. I'm looking at the flow from all the institutions I'm seeing. I'm looking at the stock to flow, Metcalfe's law, that chart pattern from 2013. It's backed up by the ETH chart pattern versus Bitcoin. And so that's going to give me about the most conviction. I only saw the gold chart recently. These are all crowd-based behavioral patterns that are playing out. So I do think we get a big run into end of year. I also think that the ETH staking cycle has changed the structure of markets. It may even be more dominant eventually than the Bitcoin halving cycle. And when most people think they've figured it out, it all changes. It happens endlessly. So I'm thinking, what is the path of most pain? Because every person now thinks, well, what I'll do is I'll reduce my exposure in December, I'll keep hold of some, and then I'll buy it back at the bottom when it's down 80%. I know how to do this. So the likelihood is it doesn't go down that far, and it repeats what we saw this year, which was big run, decent size sell-off, takes 6 months before it takes out the high, screams for a new high again. Everyone panics in, sells off again, and it keeps going up in this jagged pattern to new highs, because we're now at the teeth of the adoption curve. Central bank digital currencies, institutions, Twitter, Facebook, everybody's starting to see the adoption. So I think it's going to change the structure, and it's going to be a bit harder because we had this nice, neat narrative that I think is going to fall apart. Just to put it in perspective, the network growth is currently at about 113% a year across the whole digital asset ecosystem. Right, at 150, 200 million users, we get to 1 billion people by 2024. That's the nature of exponential maths.
Yeah.
Now, 1 billion people from here, we can't get our heads around it.
Yeah.
But that's why I don't think we can have the 80% fall. I still think ETH finishes this year closer to 15,000 than to 10,000.
Yeah.
Just by the nature of what is actually going on right now and the chart patterns and, you know, the people who are coming into the space. I actually still see ETH potentially, the small probability upside is that it hits 40,000 by the summer. That's because of the staking cycle and how the charts look, and using the log chart, extending it forwards, and a number of things give me that. You know, we don't get a proper elongated bear market. And by an elongated bear market, I'm not talking down 80, I'm talking about down 50 and it stays down for 9 months and bores everybody out, kind of thing. I think that happens when the flippening happens, and we'll readjust again and Bitcoin will become the larger asset. I think the flippening has a high, not a high probability, a decent probability.
Yeah.
In the next 9 months. Of course, there are going, ETH's dominance, like Bitcoin's dominance, will fall over time because new technology comes into the space and they solve different problems, and they have different orders of centralization versus decentralization as trade-offs. And that's absolutely fine. So the Bitcoin dominance is going to diminish over time. ETH dominance will diminish over time. Sol's dominance versus others will diminish over time, because this space is changing in structure. So I don't have an issue with that. I'm not an ETH person. I'm just like, this is the best horse to back, best risk-adjusted return. I'm a crypto maximalist. I totally believe that this is the future of all digital value. But my job is to select which horse to back and when. My job is not to come at this with a philosophy of it can only be one. You know, this is not Highlander here. We're in the investment business. And we're also in the business of changing the world's business models and, you know, distributing wealth and all of that stuff. So let it play out how it plays out. The network is actually not the technology, it's the people that use it. That's the key point here. So if it continues to attract nodes and interconnections between the nodes in its new format, then it's survived yet another Lindy test. We saw this exact same thing with Bitcoin in 2017 with the forking wars. And that was the biggest Lindy test. In fact, it threw me off Bitcoin. I sold, you know, I bought Bitcoin at 200 back in 2013, sold it in 2017 for 2,500 early because of this. And I'm like, is it going to survive this S-curve moment or not? And I wasn't sure. So I couldn't commit capital to it. Now, is Ethereum going to survive this S-curve moment? The probability is high because of the network effects and how robust they are, but it's not certain. So would I want to reduce my ETH exposure after we've gone into this? Probably. Are there other opportunities in different areas in crypto? Of course. The layer twos on Ethereum solve that same problem. I just think it's going to be a blend. I really think that people are trying to frame it too much about what we understand from the internet and less about what we understand from internet businesses, where there's millions of businesses solving different problems for different people in different ways. Not all cloud storage went to Amazon. In fact, Microsoft is gigantic and Google is gigantic. And, you know, there's so many different ways that I just don't think of the world in those terms. I did at first think of the world as, you know, is Bitcoin the base layer? I'm just not even sure that's right anymore. It could be, and I'm open to that possibility. Again, I'm not anti-Bitcoin in any way. The answer is right now, I don't know. But I think Solana plays a role. Could it be larger than ETH over time? Potentially. Could there be a flippening? Possibly.